Chapter 8. The Spiral Staircase House. Dropping down off the busy coast highway between sparse trees, Topanga Canyon was a dirt road to maybe a dozen 1920s beach retreats secreted in plain sight. One house made of raw, dark wood had spiraling wooden stairs to thick front doors. Inside was a meeting room, such as kids might use at camp, with benches attached to surrounding walls and a picnic table near the kitchen. 2 rooms at the back of the house accommodated us for sleeping. The lane was outwardly sedate. However, Hippie was alive and well in Topanga Canyon, where the garbage man not only took away grass, but delivered it. Then 2 weeks after we moved in, we received a notice from a Northern California police department advising us to pick up our bus. It had been abandoned. Tony and Ella went to reclaim it. Good thing, because the Spiral Staircase House was a known inn for travelers. Our next bus trip was just for the trip-in. Charlie was always looking for warmer weather. Patty's mother lived in Alabama, and many of us had never been to Florida. Before departure, we cast ourselves as Hollywood productions. The idea was to give the bus a pass, and Hollywood people seemed to have a pass to go anywhere. A pretty French artist living in the lane needed something to do. We needed professional-looking signs. We got her some white paint and returned to see Hollywood Productions in perfect 6-inch block letters on both sides of the bus. Despite the French accent she had, none of us had thought to tell her how to spell it. Charlie said we should add a number to the title, and chose the number 9 for no reason that I know of. Our southern trip is abbreviated in both my memory and notes. We spent a night trekking barefoot through New Mexico's White Sands National Monument, leaving the bus parked by the perimeter fence. It was fortunate for us that the police arrived after we had retucked ourselves inside it, and that it was so late it was early, and that Charlie, by fluke, in a long religious theatrical robe, was able to quietly explain that the rest of our entourage were asleep in the back. We'd barely covered and hushed ourselves when he opened the partition door, allowing them to shine flashlights inside. Reclosing it, he assuaged their concerns about vagrancy and trespassing, asking if they hadn't seen the signs on the sides of the bus. They flash-lit Hollywood Productions, cordially advised a better place to park, and left. My next memory is of a small Texas college town where the bus broke down and the service station mechanic said something about a 2-week wait for the necessary replacement part. Some college boys offered to share their apartment. Rain kept us inside. I had a stomach sickness, and time dragged. Patty got use of a car, deciding to travel with a few other girls to see her mother in Alabama. While gone, they had a potentially fatal collision. Patty was driving across a bridge when 3 dogs seemed to come out of nowhere. She swerved the car, crashed the rail, and wound up over the edge of the bridge. Shaken and a little bruised, The girls were otherwise sound. Patty said later that she couldn't help her reaction because the dogs had made eye contact with her. In hindsight, if Patricia Krenwinkel had been killed or disabled in that crash, would Abigail Folger be alive today? That didn't happen. When we got the bus back, Rob and Deuce, whose apartment we'd shared, asked to travel with us. As the weather was cold and the bus needy, Florida was out of reach. Heading back to California through higher elevations, we got snowed down in Winslow, Arizona. We had to leave the bus in a small service station, divide up and hitchhike on roads with 7-foot snowbanks on either side. It was a cold 2 a.m., but I remember being warmed by a paper cup of coffee and the heater in the cab of a semi rolling towards someplace warm like Bakersfield. Charlie traveled alone, naturally got picked up by a young woman, and later, with uncharacteristic amazement, reported seeing a monkey running around in the snow. He got out of the car to see if he could coax it inside, but it ran away. Once again, grounded in Topanga Canyon Lane, we made ourselves at home, but more lodgers soon came up the spiral staircase. An uncombed 6'4" mountain man hoisting dirty outdoor gear. A wildly dark gypsy-looking woman in long skirts, and a cherubic young girl. As we adjusted accommodations, all eyes went to the girl. She was closer to 12 than 20, with a freckled nose, thick, straight auburn hair, striking blue-green eyes, and luminous skin like pale fresh fruit. The older people who brought her were not her parents. Later, I saw her surrounded by a small group of neighbors and figured that she was used to being stared at. There was no ignoring that Diane was pubescent, but she was also childlike. She was soon scooped into our social circles, while the black-haired woman with big bones and teeth and the mountain man missing a few were entertained by others. Truth told, Diane was not happy with them, and they were not happy when she opted to stay with us. They tried very hard to talk her out of it. Later, she told us that during the past year, she had lived with different people, including one couple who shared her in rough sex with biting and pinching. Diane's parents were middle-aged hippies who, a year before, when she was 13, had dropped out of conventional life to explore alternatives. Trusting idealistic people, they had allowed her to travel with other hippies. And so it was that she came with us. Charlie knew that I was jealous of Diane. He finally stopped, looked me in the eyes, smiled and embraced me, and said, "She's your sister." I loved my sister, but by then the words sister and brother had enlarged in popular meaning to include persons with backgrounds and identities like oneself. In that context, we women were a sisterhood, and Diane had become one of us. Diane's parents and her own younger sister soon arrived in their van. They were attractive, arguably innocent people. The 8-year-old could roll a lid of weed quicker than any of the adults, and she never smoked it. They talked about going to see land their friends had purchased in the Nevada desert. Tony had regained our bus, so we made a group trip of it. Their family, our family, and another family with small children. The most striking thing about the desert is the space. One Los Angeles mayor had suggested using the Mojave Desert as a repository for the city's massive quantities of garbage because he thought it was good for nothing else. We were just realizing that the space of the world was as important as the clutter, that a stretch for the eyes and mind could give a new perspective. For 2 days, we drove down long, empty roads. The rumble of the bus engine was mesmerizing. One night, I spaced out until exclamations from the others drew me to the open windows. Some distance across that dark, flat landscape, with its shady globs of brittle bushes, was a phosphorescent green dome. It was big and looked alternately solid and translucent. It might have been a domed stadium or shopping center, but all around it was space, not even a road. We looked at each other in unspoken wonder as the green dome shrank into the distance, and we were just settling down when the bus engine died, abruptly engulfing us in loud silence. The men got out to examine the engine. A flashlight beam bounced about the enveloping darkness. The bus door squeaked open, and one of the men got in to start it, but after half a dozen of attempts, it was decided that we should wait until daylight. People in the bus nervously began spreading blankets and expressing fears, half joking, of giant green insects staring in the windows. Their jocular fear made me smile involuntarily. When Charlie came to the door, I looked to include him in the humor, but was startled by his expression. He was absent. To no one in particular, he said, "There's too much fear in here." And he took a sleeping bag outside. I lay down with questions, but my consciousness was extinguished with the light. Bright sunshine poured through the open windows. People stirred, and we clambered out of the bus to find large bushes, awed by the pristine panorama. Tony pulled up one of the bus's old-fashioned hood flaps to probe the engine, but when another of the men got into the driver's seat and turned the key, it started. Grinning and shaking his head, Tony called everyone. We filed inside and were off. I had questions for Charlie that I forgot to ask. After imaginary giant green insects came a swarm of little red ones. They were all over the highway ahead of us. A closer view clarified. Men in red uniforms carrying shotguns. They blocked the road with military efficiency, ordered us out, and for nearly an hour, went in and out of our bus, rifling its contents. Before dismissing us, they begrudged an explanation. Murder. There'd been a murder in the area, and they were searching for the rifle. Returning to Topanga Canyon Lane, Diane's parents waved goodbye to her, and to the happy group of what they thought were typical hippies. We would see them many times, but never once could they see what was ahead for their daughter, and more daughters to come. Nancy and Dee Dee were sunny, tanned beach kids ditching a Malibu high school where we met them in the lane. Nancy was small and beautiful, with ash blonde hair to her waist, and her chin held high. She was 16 and savvy, an awarded amateur photographer. Her father, like mine, was an aeronautical engineer, but of a higher echelon, sometimes called in to work for the Pentagon. Deirdre was taller, a wholesome, sandy-colored girl with freckles. Her parents were successful in the entertainment business. Her mother, then on Broadway playing the title role in the theater version of Auntie Mamie. Since her parents were in New York, the person Dee Dee saw most at home, besides her teenaged brother and an often inebriated uncle, was the maid who let her get away with anything. Both girls began visiting us whenever they could. Then came Melba, a trim 50-ish woman with champagne hair and a southern aristocratic manner. Melba came to the lane looking for someone to clean her stables, figuring some hippie kids might do it cheap. We took the job, 3 or 4 of us going on weekends into the Malibu hills, where her stately white home on a private bluff distantly overlooked the ocean. Melba owned 2 thoroughbred horses kept in white stables, and, like her, they were high-strung and unapproachable. It took a couple of hours to clean out the stalls and bed them with fresh straw. After conceding that we'd done a good job, Melba hesitated, putting probing words into the air about how much she would need to pay us. Her concern about money was unbefitting a woman of her dress. We told her not to worry about it. Then, testily, as if without her own consent, she invited us through the back door of her kitchen for lunch, directing us to wash in the bathroom, and, when we asked, to go ahead and shower. Meanwhile, she prepared, from dry ingredients and molasses, Boston baked beans and dark brown bread that we enjoyed with butter at a sunny glass-topped table in her breakfast room. And, reluctantly, Melba caught herself enjoying our company. As the weeks went by and the weekends came, Melba opened her back door smiling, and then pretended it was the stables that badly needed our attention, not her. Her home could have been featured in magazines. The elegantly shaped furniture and glass cases displaying artworks in a living room with a full ocean view. In reality, the house had 2 mortgages. Melba was not wealthy. Her southern relatives were. She had been married and divorced, and then got into real estate, a job that hadn't worked out for her. She still had litigation in court over a man who had swindled her out of thousands of dollars. Melba said she couldn't bear for her friends and relatives to know it. She was now working in an executive position for a government social service, which enabled her to bring home surplus foods that she gave to us, with the secrets of her true financial status, things she could divulge to no one else. The cosmic gathering was what I heard someone call a night when a projected light show and live music drew to the spiral staircase house more people than would fit in it. and we danced down the hollow halls of the infinite. It might have been a New Year's Eve party to neighborhood hippies, but in cosmic perspective, putting lines between years will be trifling. Enter Bobby Beausoleil, Cupid, to his former band. Neither small nor baby-faced, but fine, according to us girls, in a top hat and cape, bobbing through the doorway, blowing an instrument he called a kaleidoscope, and trickling notes that ran up and down the spines of the dancers, faster and faster, until I blinked out. I awoke alone in our bus, hearing a rhythm that turned out to be rain on the metal roof. Far up the lane, I heard a tremendous downpour coming. Anxiously, I listened to it approach, pummel the bus, and pass. After a moment, came another deluge, and then another, the pounding sounding like sighs relieving the sky, or waves on the beach, or the pulsing blood through my heart, releasing myself into myself to clean and redeem myself in cycles. The connections awed me. The bus door cranked open. Charlie stuck his boot on the stairs, asking me to grab a rag to wipe the mud from it before he got in. He was in good humor, talking with other people. As I cleaned his boot, cradling his foot like a rare treasure, I thought of Bible stories, of devoted souls in the reverent act of washing others' feet. My reverie was broken only when he spoke. He didn't sound like Sunday school when he reminded me that I'd left the rest of him and several other people standing out in the rain. The next day, the spiral staircase house slept, as if we'd dreamt the night before. An older man named Zeb swept the porch and dropped word that you could get good eats out of supermarket garbage bins. The treasure he left was to feed us for years. We girls crept behind Malibu's markets, poking pinched fingers into the bins and barely touching the piles of surplus food. Then we spied things worth a climb inside. Crates of fresh fruits, of which some, but not all, had bruises or spots. Boxes of lettuce, onions, avocados, tomatoes, and peppers. It was good, nutritious food, and there was only one reason much of it had been tossed away. People didn't want to buy a small stalk of celery or a tomato with a bruise. They wanted picture-perfect goods and left the crooked carrots to us. Meat refuse was entirely avoidable, as most markets kept it in separate dumpsters. We were continuously surprised by what we found. Sealed blocks of cheese with a few tiny specks of mold. Dented or misprinted packages of things as crackers and pasta. Dozens of cartons of cold, fresh eggs on ice. All but one or two intact, albeit a little sticky. We brought it all home, separated it, washed it thoroughly, and sat about at different tables to pare it down for pizzas, spaghetti, and stews that fed dozens. We had real butter, bread, and bright, crisp salads. And we came to believe that you could have fed the world with just America's garbage. One evening after dinner, The men were across the lane, playing music, and some of us girls were doing dishes, when a beefy, bald man with one earring and a heavy black mustache appeared at the kitchen entrance, demanding to be fed. 2 other men stood behind him. Ella coldly lit the flame under the leftovers, as some of us slid into the bedroom to put on more clothes, and Patty asked them where they were from, directing them to drop their bags in the front room. When our guys came in, the strangers were sitting at the picnic table, waiting for food. Charlie introduced himself, and El Toro did the same, maintaining a sneer and an attitude of confrontation. He seemed to believe that the house was his, and that we were intruders. Charlie engaged him in lightweight verbal sparring, after which the man conceded they would only be staying a couple of days. We didn't see them that long, but the next time the bully came, he was alone, and it was specifically for a woman. First, he took hold of Patty. Susan challenged him, and someone ran to get Charlie. The ensuing exchange was brief. I didn't hear what Charlie said, but the bull went straight to the front room, where, sitting on a bench, he reached into his satchel. When he removed his hand, I saw the glint of a big blade. Then Charlie did something I never expected and will probably never forget. He went straight to the menacing man, sat down beside him, and turned his back to him. Suddenly the bull rose, bellowing, and plunged the knife into a wall. Warning, this would not be the last from him. He jacked out his knife and left. For a few moments, everyone was quiet. After Charlie went out, we girls began to talk, and then to laugh. Charlie had gambled the bully's bluff. It seemed a stunning display of strategy, but in the instant, he couldn't have thought much about it. The prospect of conflict with the mixed-up Toro put a shadow on us. If the police became involved, it could be worse. So late that night, we gathered our things, boarded the bus, and left the lane without destination. And there on the highway, hitchhiking, was Bobby Beausoleil, a seeming magician who directed us high into the hills where he had rented the basement of a burned-down house. "This is Lucifer's place," he said, arching an eyebrow. We landed on the roof. It was flat. I poked my head over the side and saw that we were standing on top of some rooms. The house had burned, leaving nothing but the basement. It had been renovated. A path led down to an atrium, a kitchen, a family room, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. The family room featured sliding glass doors with a view of the steeply terraced canyon. Bobby had considered fashioning a massive hollow skull on the flat roof, one large enough to live in. At night, he said, its eye socket windows would glow all over the canyon. Light leapt from his own eyes. Glimmers of ideas too many for him, alone, to fulfill, and to what purpose beyond experience. He was 19 or 20, an artist by almost any means, with a masterpiece physique and fair skin contrasted by dark hair. He offered us the basement for as long as we needed it. Bobby was living in an apartment closer to town and paid rent on both places with income from movies and rock bands I didn't know about until later. In the ensuing weeks, he dropped by the basement, unannounced, to spend time with girls. I find him in the kitchen at sunrise looking for food, or striding down the walk looking roguish, a role he seemed to relish. One afternoon he stopped by with his guitar, and a few words later he and Charlie were playing what became a long musical conversation. Charlie's rhythms were fundamental, while Bobby's music soared above and around those rhythms. In visual terms, Bobby's music was ornate. His superior ability was obvious, but he was impatient to air it fully, taking off on his own and losing fusion, an Icarus-like lapse. There were meetings and partings. Their styles were different. Yet when the music rose above them and meshed, they looked like they were listening, like they were the instruments, and the music was playing them. That was worth waiting for. The whole afternoon was entertaining, but Bobby and Charlie were not putting on a show. They were sounding each other out. At the end of the day, Bobby gave Charlie his top hat, an obvious sign of his respect. I never realized what a partner or brother meant to Charlie before I saw him with Tony and Bobby. Tony didn't much relate to Bobby or to the music, but he and Charlie were talking about getting motorcycles. They had Harley choppers in mind, but the first thing to come along, a gift to Charlie, was a nice BMW. When Charlie wasn't on it, Tony was. I think he felt more comfortable on a bike than on a woman. Tony slept beside us and showed us the utmost respect. We knew that he liked us, but he made no move to give anything but brotherly affection. Maybe, like a lot of people, he considered us Charlie's girls. Maybe he wanted more privacy. Most likely, he wanted an exclusive relationship. But whatever the reason, it bothered him. Ella was more like a buddy to Tony. She rode on the back of the bike and carried the stash. They took off on the bike one day, saying they'd be back. But they didn't come back. The next day, Charlie went inside the bus and didn't come out. At late afternoon, I went to the door, but it was locked. He said, "Go away." There was nothing any of us could do or say to ease the loss of a brother. Bobby Beausoleil was living up Old Topanga Canyon Road with a creamy-skinned older woman who was probably under 30, but exuded sophistication and maternal tolerance for his uppances and rovings. He was virile and energetic, but took little time with women. When I stopped by their apartment one morning and he summoned me inside, they appeared to be waking under floral sheets on a mattress in the living room. He stretched to his full length and patted the woman's butt as she rose for her robe. Then he talked to me from the bathroom while splashing cold water on his face and running his hands through his hair. He said he thought I was his landlord, Gary, who lived upstairs. Gary had come earlier that morning, while Bobby and the woman were corporally engaged. Bobby said he'd become aware that someone was watching them through the front window, and it turned out to be Gary. A thin, pale individual. Gary Hinman was cradling a big cross-eyed cat the first time I met him. It vigorously needled and suckled his own forearm, drawing specks of blood. Through a tickled grin, Gary explained that the cat had been weaned too early. This wouldn't be worthy of mention, except that within 18 months, Gary would die violently at Bobby's hand. And this is among the few uneasy recollections I have of him. We had strange visitors to the basement house. There was the guy Charlie good-humoredly deduced was a narc, sending him sneaking out the door in the same way he'd tried to sneak in. There was a hairy, schizophrenic mute with a young wife and a baby. And maybe the strangest of all was the group that came looking for Bobby. A high-strung band for whom he had done guitar work in the past. We were just beginning to feel the effects of some potent LSD when they filed into the basement. A noodly boy and a thin, scowling man carrying a flute like a bludgeon, both dressed in white ballet tights and tunics, followed by two enormously fat, rat-haired women in pink tights, tutus, and mean gashes of makeup. The flautist, ironically uncomfortable being stared at, motioned Bobby aside to put forth his business. The rest stood out over us, waiting. They might have been interesting, like a quirky carnival, had they not taken themselves so seriously. But the big women looked like they were hauled around to punch out the first person who laughed. After Bobby declined his proposition, the self-important stick man, followed by the others, left as he had came. Bitch angry. Ella soon called to say she was coming home, but was concerned about leaving the bike. Charlie told her to tell Tony to keep it. Charlie got temporary use of another bike when we took a trip. The whole group of us in the bus again zonked on acid. I don't know who was driving, but I found myself on a foot in a residential neighborhood touring an old man's garden. A luxuriant labor of love for which we showed appropriate appreciation. In another suburban neighborhood, the police stopped us and called for backup. More than a dozen of us stood beside the blaring police radios in broad daylight, waiting for officers to process our IDs. Then it occurred to me that we had never paid the bus tickets, and that Charlie, in violation of this, might be subject to arrest. I glanced around the group, but didn't see him. Nor was he in either of the police cars. Then I spied, at the end of the long residential block, a group of boys about 12 years old riding Stingray bicycles. He was among them. The police returned our IDs, thanked us for our cooperation, and left. The boys on bikes rode up the street, leaning back to raise their front tires, shouting to Charlie, "That's a wheelie!" Charlie tried a wheelie, and they hollered, Yeah, like that!" One kid yelled, "Look at this!" Increasing speed, he skidded into a 180 turn. As the rest of us got into the bus, the boys circled and sat on their bikes talking. A few minutes later, Charlie came walking up the street, separate and removed. I think I knew he always would be. As much as we like to believe we were not alone, we each lived in separate worlds with different ideas, limitations, and problems. Yet, as in any union, each of our problems was all of our problems. We still had dozens of boxes of bagged chocolates until a 4-year-old boy took them. He was, by definition, a brat, relentlessly whining at his mother's skirts. His parents were conservatively dressed people, apparently well educated, and possibly affiliated with the military. They didn't volunteer information, and we didn't ask. When we offered them a place to rest, they were in a large shopping center, obviously lost, tired, and traveling with 2 children, 2 cars, and everything they owned. Something had caused this couple to leave one home in search of another, without a clue as to where they would land. And their level of need was such that they were willing to leave their 2 young children with hippie strangers for 2 weeks while they looked for another place to live. They also left their red sports car with permission for us to use it. But Bobby and I spent 9 hours in the Redwood City Jail before the couple could be located to verify the fact. It was my first arrest. At the basement house, the 10-year-old girl fit in right away. But her 4-year-old brother could not be satisfied. He was smart and stubbornly determined to do the opposite of what we were doing. If we were sitting peacefully, he was stomping, pushing, and pulling. When we were active and urging him to come along, he refused to budge. Charlie spent more time with him than any of us did, and one afternoon summoned us to get out the candy. Someone brought a single bag, but Charlie said, "No, all of it." He wants us to throw it all in the swimming pool. The dry, old stone swimming pool downhill was half full of blackened debris from the fire. About 10 of us helped carry out the boxes, each containing 40 cellophane bags of chocolates. Charlie had to urge us to open each bag before hurling them into the pool. Hundreds of chocolates went flying, caramels and stars and mints. Everyone was mute. Nobody liked doing it. The boy stood stiff, rocking foot to foot, his eyes darting from one of us to the other. It took maybe 10 minutes to complete the task. Then we went into the house without looking at him. From there, I watched him sit down beside Charlie, overlooking the pool, and I went about my business. In the days that followed, the boy played by himself amongst us. We were never again awakened by whining, nor did he throw tantrums. Up early one morning, I followed him out the door to the paved road. Descending into the residential canyon, he knew that I was behind him, and he didn't wait for me. But every so often he said something. He pulled out a natural gas pipe and called it a dragon. After what seemed a long walk, I wondered if he was running away. The road became steep and busy with traffic. I decided to stop him. That's when he dropped out of sight. In a panic, I ran until I came to a mailbox. Looking down the mountain through treetops, I saw him standing on the landing of some long wooden stairs, grinning. He was waiting for me. My relief was replaced by propriety. This was obviously the stairway to somebody's house. The boy's little body kicked around the landing, and he looked up at me again. Somebody's house, I was thinking. With a clear expression of disgust, he continued downstairs without me. I followed. 10 or 12 steps led to each of 7 landings. At last, I spotted a cottage and a creek with a miniature bridge across it. An old man in a hat came out to greet the boy, and they went inside together. They were friends. When I got to the open door, the man looked at me without welcome. He had poured the boy a cup of cocoa from a pan on a pot-bellied stove, and he motioned for me to serve myself. The boy drank his chocolate and moved across the room freely. I tried to hold a conversation with the man, but he wasn't a talker. They both went outside, and I followed. I started to comment on the wonderful bridge, but the man was across the yard, his back to me, tending his garden. After inspecting the bridge, I felt we should go. The boy had already started for the stairs. We walked home as we had come, the boy allowing me to come closer, but never beside him. I wondered how many mornings he had made this trip and gotten back to the basement before any of us knew. After 2 weeks, the kids' parents returned, having found a place to live. The boy was playing when he heard his mother's voice. As soon as she had hugged and kissed him, he went right back to whining at her skirt. We laughed at him to say we knew this was a game, but he wouldn't look at us. It was something they had going between them. Nancy and Deirdre came from Malibu, bringing food from their parents' cupboards. They'll never miss it, Dee Dee assured us. They don't even know it's there. The girls also presented us with high-quality cannabis and LSD. They knew all the best dealers at the high school. Deirdre was of strong English-Irish stock, resilient and good-natured. She wore jeans and soft blouses, too adventurous for dresses, and she looked like a child when she grinned. On a warm afternoon, she sat on our roof, strumming a guitar and singing to herself, while below, Charlie and I listened, and he said tenderly, "Look at her. She's 10 times the actress her mother is, without even trying." I looked up to Dee Dee, and also her mother, an Academy Award-winning, internationally known actress who would languish, awaiting another worthy role, before accepting the part of a mystery writer in a watery American TV series beamed into millions of homes weekly. When Dee Dee expressed cynicism about her parents, I was surprised. She apologized in the same way, taking it back as if to dodge hurt feelings and keep from blaming people she loved. Her family was broken apart by the success of her parents, and she reflected it in her little cracks. Nancy was tougher, more headstrong and feisty. She grew up the only girl in a large family of brothers. She was petite and pretty, but a scrapper, full of stick-to-itness and the gut strings to do what she had never done before, as if it were second nature. Of course, we didn't know this at the time. One night, we were rolling through Malibu in the bus when 4 sheriff's cars surrounded us. It looked like a drug raid, but the crux of the problem was a number of rookie deputies who needed experience. 20 guinea pigs filed into the sheriff's small substation and spent the night. The men were instantly locked up. We women sat in clusters around the questioning tables, giving ID information to the trainees. Superiors sauntered in and out of the room with comments like, "No hanky-panky now, Ralph." And several of the older men gave us lectures on the perverted lives we were leading. The men you are with are only after one thing. No secret what was on their minds. Pencils fell on the floor. Crumpled papers went in the trash. The procedure took till dawn, and one young Lorraine was recognized by a local man as Nancy, wanted by Mom and Dad. Nancy went to juvenile hall. On the day of Nancy's hearing, 4 of us girls went to court to meet her mother, a small, elegant woman at the end of her temper. She thought Nancy had been living with speed freaks. She had intended to ask the court to take custody of her daughter, but by the time of the hearing, she was relaxed and smiling. To our relief, she asked for her daughter's release, and so granted. The 4 of us were invited for dinner. Nancy stayed in Malibu, tolerating her parents' rules and talking with us on the phone Bobby had hooked up. Her father had her on restriction, and it wasn't but a few weeks before she called whispering. She'd overheard her father tell her mother he could not accept her attitude. He was going to have her placed in a lockup facility the next day. So she came to the basement to live in hiding. With Nancy's illegality came a plague of police. They came using the black bus as an excuse, saying it was parked too far out in the street. We sarcastically guessed that it was blocking traffic at the end of the road. They came at all hours to check our IDs. One night I awoke as someone stepped on my sleeping bag. I saw the glint of a flashlight and the shadow of 2 large men on their way out the door. Seconds later came loud knocking and the toneless announcement, "Police officers." Somebody turned on a light and they filed in. At guard and on point, they searched the house. What was the excuse for this early morning raid? People. How many people were living in the house, and how many toilets were available? Satisfied that our sanitation was up to par, they left. Nancy knew that we could be charged for harboring her. Demonstrating a cool determination to stay out of custody, she slid between the house and the woods like a vapor, unnoticed even by many of us. When police came, she had the patience to wait in the bushes as long was necessary, appearing later with foliage in her hair. Nancy was a light-hearted prankster, but she wasn't playing when it came to her freedom. Donnie De Niro, through a line of acquaintances he and Charlie had known at the McNeil Island Federal Penitentiary. He was short and drove an older model Cadillac with fins. Barbered hair and pressed slacks pretty much pegged him to the 1950s. and he looked like he'd swallowed a beach ball that challenged the buttons on his short-sleeved rayon shirt. But Donnie had completed his prison time for making counterfeit money, and he was back on the streets to start a new life. In the trunk of his car, he had a suitcase full of fresh 20s. "What will we do with money?" Charlie asked, causing a round of chortles. Donnie was offering a substantial cut if we could help him pass the bills. No, Charlie said. "What we need are new IDs." Somehow, he talked Donnie into making the IDs without any recompense from us. Except Susan. Susan appealed to Donnie in the raised eyebrow way. So when Donnie came again, Susan came out in her Chiquita blouse, showing plenty of shoulder, hopped into his convertible, and they wheeled away like Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner. He brought her back, but he was ID okay. For the next week, while Donnie set up, those of us opting for different identities would consider new names. Ella, on a lark, chose the last name of Cinder. Others were more ordinary, but Susan strolled the room pensively, coming up with something that sounded like a French whore. Charlie said, "How about Sadie? Real country-like. Sadie Mae Glutz." Susan shrieked, "Charlie!" But she liked the laughter, and the name stuck. Nancy was to be Glenda, but mistakenly became Brenda. And we paper married young Diane to one of the Texans. What none of us knew about IDs was that there were 7 indistinguishable markings, making them legitimate, including 2 sets of staple holes at the top of each card. When the police came looking for Nancy, the new IDs were scrutinized with doubt. But in the confusion of people rising and dressing, they sufficed. No, they didn't want coffee. They split. After a repeat performance, we piled in the bus and took a trip. And so it was that we kept moving, circling back to the spiral house, back to the spiral staircase, and to Bobby's basement, and forward to new places. Every time I get out of prison, people are running faster, talking faster. The 40s were mellow. I got out in the 50s and things were like 10 miles per hour. I go in and the world stops. I get out and it's 25 miles per hour and I see a lumber truck a day. I go in and get out and I see more lumber trucks, new freeways, more smoke, more dead fish in the harbor, less birds. This last time I get out and it's all going 105. Lumber trucks 24 hours a day. Kids all over the streets. And people going crazy. So I think the answer is to pull away from it. Get together. With everything I missed, see it, and come back, and when it's burnt itself out, I look at it all. I say a few things. I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of us and all these kids whose parents don't want them. And I say a little more, and pretty soon the police are after us, and they've been chasing us all over L.A. Charles Manson, L.A. County Jail, 1970.